So, hello everyone. My name is Robert Hamilton. I'm Vice President of the New Enlightenment Project, and welcome to our interesting discussion today, Two Solitudes of Secularism. The New Enlightenment Project was established to promote a world where reason and compassion guide knowledge, governance, and individual flourishing. And its mission emphasizes open, respectful dialogue, intellectual exchange, advocacy, collaboration, and research on Canadian challenges to Enlightenment values, including things like polarization. In that regard, NEP convenes and publishes articles, podcasts, and videos and events like today's discussion to promote humanist ideals through free inquiry and the application of Enlightenment humanism to contemporary conditions. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'll just have a quick opening remarks on a point of common ground and where we're coming from here as humanists, atheists, and free thinkers. People are still coming in. Before we explore where our speakers have differing views, it's worth stating what nearly all Canadian humanists, atheists, free thinkers, and agnostics would agree on in conversation generally. First, I think we share a commitment to equal civic standing. That's no one's rights, opportunities, or public worth should depend on which religion they follow or whether they follow any religion at all. So secondly, I think we share a strong commitment to freedom of conscience. People must be able to form, revise, and live by their convictions without coercion, whether that coercion comes from government, from powerful institutions, or from social pressure. Third, I think we agree that the state should be generally impartial in matters of religion and belief. Whatever model of secularism one follows, the objective is not to privilege faith, penalize dissent, or make citizenship conditional on worldviews. Fourth, I think we share a commitment to democratic and rights-based governance. Disputes of this type should be resolved through reasoned argument, transparent lawmaking, and constitutional principles, not through sectarian power, intimidation, or moral panic. And finally, I think we share a concern for social cohesion in a pluralistic Canada, a society where people with deep differences can still cooperate as equals, where public institutions are trusted by everyone who relies on them. So, with that common ground in place, I think we can now examine the real question today. Given these shared values, what institutional design best protects them? Is neutrality best achieved through broad accommodation or individual expression, through stricter limits in certain state roles, or through some context-sensitive balance? So those are just a few opening remarks related to a common ground of understanding as humanists. I'd like to start then with introduction. I don't really have a specific introduction. We didn't discuss this before. So a quick self-introduction of our two speakers. Let me just spotlight Michel and Leslie. And what I've got on my screen here, Michel, could you just say a few words of where you're coming from with the AHQ?
Okay. First of all, my background, I'm an engineer by training, and I'm coming from France. I have been in Canada for 59 years now, so I know the place, I guess. And very early, I found that the not credibility, but the ability to believe anything very easily was quite spread within the population where I live, which was in Quebec. I said, well, I have to do something about it. And I first went to the skeptics of Quebec. I was actually a board member for a long time of the skeptics. But that was not enough. And in 2005, together with Bernard Cloutier and Normand Baillargeon, we created the Association of des Humanistes du Québec. The Humanist Association of Quebec then has now something like 20 years, 21 years almost. And we have been doing this kind of dissemination of critical thinking through conference, through workshops, through movies as well. And we have been recording videos also for the general audience. And this is why I'm here today, is because I have been, in fact, directing this kind of organization for a good chunk of this 20 years.
Okay, sounds great. Then move to Leslie. Could you just introduce yourselves for people in the audience here today?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I'm looking forward to it. My name is Leslie Rosenblood. I am the Secular Chair for the Centre for Inquiry Canada. I'm the host of its official podcast, Podcast for Inquiry. Although I'm an atheist and have been for several decades, I was never very happy with that descriptor. And I was about, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago when I found that there was a term called a humanist. As soon as I heard it, I was like, that's it, that's me. So philosophically, I'm a humanist. And politically, I'm a secularist. I strive for government neutrality in matters of religion, where government neither supports nor suppresses religious expression among the citizenry. And I'll have a few more words to say about that once we get into things. So thank you again, everyone. And I think that's enough about me for now.
Okay, so thank you very much, Leslie. I think what the format is at this point is people can initially start with their positions on the laïcité and the accommodationist model of secularism. But first, I just want to have a quick little just a question. And this comes from my background with respect to street epistemology. I'd like for starting with perhaps with Leslie, could you perhaps express what you feel Michel thinks secularism is?
Well, I haven't met Michel before today, and I haven't spoken with him, so I'm hesitant to put words in his mouth without actually knowing him.
If you were to guess, what would you think he would think?
So I just want to preface.
Well, yeah,
I'm willing to make a guess, but
yes.
It is a guess. It is no more than a guess because
yes.
It's not an informed opinion.
Yes.
So my opinion would be, or my guess for Michel's perspective is that as the founder of the Humanist Association of Quebec and as a secular humanist, he believes strongly in the separation of church and state, and that government employees are agents of the state and therefore represent the state. And therefore, anything that they wear, anything that these employees wear as part of their official duties, bears with it the implicit endorsement of the state. And because Michel believes that Canada is a secular nation and Quebec is a secular state, having employees, representatives, and agents of the government wearing ostentatious religious symbols implies government endorsement of what those religions say. And that is a grievous violation of secular principles. Therefore, Bill 21, which just mandates that you cannot wear religious symbols while at work, while you are effectively a representative or an agent of the state, is a enforcement of strong secular principles, and that therefore the bill deserves full support from the secular community in Canada.
Okay, that's an interesting guess. Okay,
Pretty good.
that's a very good. It's just shot. Yeah, give it a try. Michel, what percent accurate would you say? Ms. Leslie was 0 to 100% accuracy.
95%.
95% accurate.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So now,
In
Michel,
the wrong profession, I need to start predicting.
you need your psyche. So I'd like Michel to try the same thing. Michel,
Oh,
could you perhaps guess what Leslie feels secularism is?
Again, this is
I guess, yes.
a total guess. And
Yeah.
I think he may have been influenced by the general perception within the Anglosphere that the freedom of religion, undefined, by the way, is something so important, something quasi sacrosanct, in fact, that it cannot suffer exception unless there's a very, very strong emergency situation, for example. And this is something that I wish to explore with him, in fact, in the rest of the conversation.
Right. So that's your guess?
That's my guess.
Okay. So Leslie, how accurate do you feel Michel's description was in terms of how?
Unfortunately, I might have to give something significantly less than 95%.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe 40 to 50. 40 to 50%,
okay.
I would say.
Okay.
In fact, I'm glad I am wrong.
No, that's good. Yes. Yeah. Well, we all have to recognize that, yeah, we are all fallible people and we can be wrong from time to time. Okay. So let's start with a couple of opening remarks and guess what, Michel? Do you have any opening remarks on what you feel laïcité or secularism is from your view?
Well, secularism first is a word and is a concept as well, and therefore, unless we define it properly, we are going to talk past each other. That's my main concern, is that we are using words and we actually don't mean the same thing. And that's why I prepare actually a presentation on secularism or laïcité, exploring the concept, because for me, the root of the misunderstanding, and it's actually very sad, is in the jurist jargon that was used a long time ago and was imprecise. And as a result, we end up with confusion. And this, unless we clear the confusion, I think within the humanist community, we can clear the confusion. There should not be no reason why not. And that's my main concern. Of course, everybody here probably knows a lot already about secularism and laicity. I'm not going to teach you that. The question is rather than when you say the word freedom of religion, what do you actually mean? That's my concern. So if you want, I can actually, I have.
Well, yeah, I just.
For 14 slides, I will go through this explanation of the root of the problem.
You have some slides, Michel?
Sorry?
Do you want to present some slides? I didn't. You want to, or we can just chat?
I can. It's up to you. I can read them. I can show them as well.
I just want to be. If it doesn't really matter.
Acceptable, of course.
Leslie, do you have any slides? No?
No, I came prepared for a conversation.
Conversation. So let's not use slides then.
Okay.
Michel, just to clarify, I just wanted to get some initial definitions of terms in terms of what are the core elements of secularism from your perspective. What would you say are sort of non-negotiable elements of it, like the separation part of it, the neutrality part of it, freedom of consciousness?
Secularism actually applies to both society and institution. And in English, it's not defined. When you say society is secular, what do you actually mean? Do you mean that people are not going to the church, or do you mean that the state is actually preventing its image and its practice to be interpreted as religious commands? That's two different things. That's why, in fact, in French, we are using two different words. We are using laïcité for the institution and only for the institution. When you say now, this is an evolution, it was not always like that. The term actually emerged in the mid 19th century, and it's not that old. Before that, the term secular just meant that you were not a priest, basically. But after that, the idea that laïcité was actually something attached to the state took form in France, especially, and became an overriding principle attached to the democratic principle. If you say that all citizens have to be equal, well, that implies a certain number of things, especially equality in front of the state, independently of your religion. And that was very important at the end of the 19th century. That's a question of the refusing that the citizens have a dual loyalty. In the case of the French, that was the fact that the Vatican, the Pope, had actually power within the kingdom or the Republic of France at the time, and that was a conflict of loyalty that was expressed quite clearly in around 1870. This became the root of this famous law, the 1905 separation of church and state. That was it was a considerable event. Mm-hmm. And we still have some difficulties with living with this fundamental example of separation of church and state that started in basically first with the American Revolution, but it took basically 1 century between 1789 and 1905. In 1789, the French Revolution, the revolution say, okay, the state, there is no more state religion, blah, blah, blah. But the actual separation of state from church took basically more than 1 century. So it's a very long process. In Quebec, it took only 50 years, which is very fast at this scale, because it started in 1960, 1962 with the rapport Parent, where they said, okay, wait a minute, we have to separate our church, especially in schools and other institutions, from the state.
So would you say, I mean, I was just in a definitional sense, looking at these concepts of separation between the individual and state, the concept of neutrality of the state itself, and the concept of freedom of conscience. Between those three general concepts, how would you prioritize as the most important of those three?
Because freedom of conscience is the absolute one. That's really important. In fact, that's what I explained in my slide, is that the central confusion was, if you look at the this was 1948 UN chart, they do give freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and freedom of religion.
Yeah.
And then you ask, okay, what is included in freedom of religion? And I will say, well, there is freedom of conscience, freedom of practice, freedom of proselytizing, and so on. So they put back freedom of conscience in freedom of religion.
Okay.
But you are doing is you are confusing two kinds of concepts. One is that was defined a long time ago by the Catholic Church is the for intérieur, which is the inner of humanity, and that's the conscience.
Yes.
And that's something which you cannot touch. This freedom is absolute because you cannot force people to think in any case. So it's not even enforceable if you want to force people to think something that's just not possible. So
Okay.
this is one thing, and that's actually freedom of conscience is not the property of only of religious people. It's also the property of any philosophical position. You want to be able to think what you want. That's one thing. But if you put this absolute freedom in freedom of religion, what you are doing is you are mixing up something which is the inner part of or thinking with something which is outer. That's called the for extérieur in French, and that was defined by the Catholic Church. You know, when they were actually at the time they were trying to force people to think, they had to make these distinctions because the church itself did not execute the many of its own decision. The execution, for example, that's a typical example is the execution of the Chevalier de la Barre for blasphemy in 1763. The church decide that there is a blasphemy, but the execution of the person is given to the king, which is the bras séculier. The secular arm, which is doing the execution, is in fact not the church; it is the state. So you have this very important connection between church and state in that particular case. And this is something that the French Revolution wanted to repel at all costs because it was unbearable. And therefore, this is a question of distinguishing between what is freedom of conscience, this is one thing, we don't touch it, and freedom of religious, what I call religious practices. I said, in fact, we humanists should not use the word freedom of religion because it's loaded. It's a trap. It's a trap because when we say freedom of religion and people understand that it's a combination of freedom of conscience and freedom of practices, they said, well, we can touch it. Otherwise, we touch freedom of conscience.
Yes.
And therefore, this is a very bad way to start a discussion is in fact in talking about freedom of religion. What I'm quite happy to discuss is freedom of practices, freedom of proselytizing, freedom of institution, religious institution. Yes, that we can talk, but don't put the freedom of conscience in freedom of religion.
Okay.
Because this is a trap.
A trap. Okay, on that trap, Leslie, I'd like to turn to you with respect to what you had said about neutrality and the concept of secularism and neutrality. When you say the state must be neutral in matters of religion and freedom of conscience, what precisely does neutrality require of the state? What does it not require the state to do?
So it means that the government doesn't take a stand on religious matters at all. It abstains from saying basically anything about the truth or falsity, validity of religion. Also, it says secularism, political secularism, is that you don't treat one religion differently than any other, nor do you treat the religious as a much broader category any differently than you treat those that have no faith. So it's kind of a small L liberal, small L democratic, liberal democratic perspective that strives for the greatest freedom for the greatest number of people.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the short version. We can get into a lot more detail. In terms of what Michel was saying, I just want to signal most of my agreement with that. The way I consider freedom of religion to be a subset of freedom of conscience and also depending on the nature of things. So freedom of religion, you in terms of your internal views, your thoughts and how you believe, that is freedom of religion in that sense is a subset of freedom of conscience.
Okay.
And another freedom that I think we both support is freedom of expression. So the external aspects of one's faith, whether you like go to church, you be in community, you wear certain types of clothing, you engage or do not engage in certain types of behaviors, that is a subset of freedom of expression. So it's not a unique right in and of itself. I do think it's important. Mm-hmm. But different aspects of what is commonly thought of as freedom of religion are a subset of freedom of conscience and freedom of expression.
Okay. So it sounds to me, Leslie, that you would agree with Michel's statement that things generally come from a standpoint of belief, conscience, and religion, and the others are sort of like cascade out of that. There's neutral based on the importance of freedom of conscience, and that neutrality is a consequence of that, or the separation is a consequence of that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean it's a way to respect the rights of everybody, or at least to the greatest extent possible. If you want to defend the fundamental human rights of freedom of expression, if you want to defend the fundamental human right of freedom of conscience, a consequence of that is that in most circumstances, you will defend the freedom of religious expression and the freedom of religious conscience. And there are situations where these fundamental freedoms conflict with other fundamental freedoms. And that's where we have conversations like this,
right?
Where we negotiate, we dispute, we argue, and we see, in all likelihood, we're not going to come out of this with one person is right and the other person is wrong.
Yeah.
But we can perhaps find a reasonable compromise where one or both of us, see some aspects while holding firm to other principles. And that is the nature of living in a pluralistic democratic nation.
Yes. And searching for the compromise is the classic Canadian approach, of course. So I just, in your model, neutrality is primarily an obligation of institutions and not of individuals. So how do you explain the distinction to someone who feels that a teacher or a police officer's visible symbol is the state speaking? That is,
I mean,
performed.
How to explain it to somebody? I mean, people can have whatever opinions or impressions that they want. I think I think that's a mistaken impression. I think we live. When I walk down the street, I see several churches of various Christian denominations. I see. I think there's one synagogue, a couple mosques, not far from where I live. These are, they are permitted. They are allowed by the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the Nation of Canada.
Yeah.
That does not mean that any of those three levels of government are endorsing any particular Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or any denomination, or any other faith for that matter, of which there are many in Canada. Buddhist and Wiccan and Hindu and many others.
So I hear you saying that representation doesn't automatically equal endorsement.
So my children go to school and they have friends, some of whom are Christian, some of whom are Jewish, some of whom are of other faiths, some of whom are non-practicing. They also have teachers who are of these various faiths. I don't think that seeing a teacher wearing a cross on their uh, uh, garments, or wearing a kippah, or wearing a turban, or wearing a hijab indicates, or a police officer wearing any of these symbols indicates that the state is endorsing what the any tenet of those particular faiths. That is an individual expression. It could be interpreted by somebody as an endorsement of the state. I would argue that's a mistaken impression, but one that people have, and we can demonstrate that that is not the case. By having by allowing people to wear symbols of their faith, and where they are incompatible, obviously it's the state can't be endorsing all of them, but also in practice, when the state's policies and laws are neutral and allow individuals to express that. Again, this is not an absolute right.
Yeah.
For example, health and safety rules. You don't have, say, motorcycle helmet laws don't apply to people of a particular faith that mandates they must wear certain types of headgear. There needs to be a way to find that the safety of the person riding the motorcycle, or the person visiting a construction site, still needs to wear the hard hat, even if it happens to violate the tenets of a faith. Now, we should try and find a way where both are possible, where person's safety is protected, and they're not violating whatever it is their religious obligations are. But you don't get an exemption from a general requirement because you happen to be of a particular faith. There's not one law for the religious and one law for everyone else, or one law for everybody with an exemption carved out on the basis of faith. That would be a gross violation of secular principles.
Yes. So, Michel, how would you react to that? I think what do you feel is the argument that visible religious symbols represent the state, compromising the state's neutrality when religious symbols are worn?
To distinguish, first is that there are symbols by common people on the street, and there are symbols by state representative. I'm not concerned about the symbols of a guy riding a motorcycle if he wants to drive his bike with a turban. That's fine with me. I don't mind. That's a matter of public safety, and there are rules for that, which is not concerning laicity at all. What we are talking about is the representative of the governments dealing directly with the public, and especially in school, dealing with children. And that is important to note that whenever someone who is employed by the government, I mean employed, not just on the side, something is important to note, that he is, for all practical purpose, he is the state. Why? Because suppose that you have a civil servant at the Bureau of car registrations that makes an error. He is giving you the wrong paper, and you are very annoyed by that, and you want to sue the office that actually made the mistake, because it cost you a lot. Who do you actually sue? The person who actually gave you the wrong paper, or the actual government, in fact, in this case? Well, this is a proof that when we say, well, the person is different from the government, the civil servant is first and foremost a person, well, that's not true. He's not first and foremost an individual when he is actually doing his job. He is the state as the public sees him. And you cannot hide that under by saying, well, private his private life and his religious life is more important than the fact that he is working for the state. I mean, we are talking about the usurpation of the majesty of the state in order to project an image, religious image, or political image. Mind you, what we are talking also, we are talking about religious symbols, but political symbols as well are forbidden, and for good reason. So this is important to make the distinction. The state is the person who is representing the state in his work is in fact the state. So you cannot say, his personal preferences override is the necessity to be neutral. I have to remind you that in 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada said that the states, and that means all the form of government, and has a duty not only to be neutral religion-wise, but also to have it has the duty to have the appearance of neutrality as well. And that is very important. At the time, in 2015, not a single province could actually meet this request because it was still admitted that, well, religions were a personal matter, and therefore, I work for the government, so I wear what I want. That's not true. I'm sorry. You cannot, it's even true in commercial situation, and you know that very well. You cannot represent a company with someone else's company overall, for example. It's not that feasible and it's not reasonable. And we say that it has effects. We say that the fact that the civil servant is actually projecting a religious image is not without effect. And this is another subject that I'm quite happy to discuss, in fact, because I have proof that just the image is actually a big influencer, a big factor influencing the perception of the public. And it's important. And there are, in fact, also situations which are very, very touchy. Imagine a judgment, a court where the judge is wearing a kippah, and you have a little Palestinian who is coming to expect a fair judgment. Right now, I'm talking. That's not really a very good start. And
so Michel, central to what I've heard you say is that neutrality and the appearance of neutrality are very closely linked.
Absolutely.
What do you say to that?
It is the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm not inventing that. It's just something which, because of that, all provinces right now, except perhaps in some way the Québec, because they have this the bill 21, they are always contravening this requirement.
Okay. What do you think of that, Leslie? The appearance of neutrality is as important as neutrality itself.
So I would quote a different. I think it was from actually the same judgment. State neutrality neither favors nor hinders any particular religious belief. That is, when it shows respect for all postures towards religion, including that of having no religious posture whatsoever. I have a philosophical problem or dispute here, and let me accept for the moment Michel's preferred definition of secularism, which is the separation of church and state. It's not my preferred one, but I don't think nonetheless, I don't think it's invalid. Let's take the separation of church and state. What a law like Bill 21 requires is a crucial, fundamental interference in religious affairs by the government, because the government is going to decide what is and is not a religious symbol. And absent somebody saying, this piece of headwear that I'm wearing for religious purposes. People do say that. But absent that, it's possible to know whether something is a religious symbol. To give another example, if I had a beard, a bushy beard, and I don't say anything about it, you don't know whether I have a beard because it's an aesthetic choice. It's just the way I like to go through the world, or whether it's due to a religious edict that I have, because there are religions that have requirements about my facial hair, and the government, if you appreciate the principle of secularism, should not be saying, okay, this person's beard is a religious symbol, is a religious expression, and that person's is not. This person's headgear is being done for religious purposes, and that one is not. The government is not capable. It's not something that the government should be involved with. If we actually want to respect secularism as the separation of church and state, that means absolutely religion should not be able to determine government policy. And I think everyone here is in full agreement with that principle. By myself, no less than anybody else. It also means that government should not be able to dictate religious policy. And when we have religion dictating government policy, we call it a theocracy, and that's bad. And when we have government dictating what is and is not religious, that's authoritarianism. And in my opinion, that's also bad. Let us stick to the separation. Excuse me. Sorry, one moment. Let us stick to the separation of church and state. Let us stick to the principle of government neutrality in matters of religion. And where some visible observance of a religious principle has no effect on the execution of one's duties, and the government should not have any say on that aspect of personal expression.
What do you think about that, Michel? Do you think that's intrusive? That the state is being intrusive?
The question first is Leslie is extending the limitation. That's what we are talking about as the limitation of a right. And I agree that there is indeed a limitation of the right, but there are reasons for this limitation, and there have been actually a lot of thinking about with the chart, whether it's a UN chart or the Canadian chart. You certainly notice that there is an article in the Canadian chart. There is article number 1, which says that the government can actually limit the following rights.
I was going to bring that up. This is wonderful.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please go ahead, Michel.
No, okay. So the matter of our difference right now is in the matter of this limitation. How much limitation you allow and how much I allow is different, basically. That's what we are talking about. Because we both agree that there has to be limitation in some cases. You cannot accept human sacrifice just because they are religious.
I am not an absolutist, Michel, and neither are you. I mean, honestly, based on this conversation so far, I think you and I do agree on about 95% of things, which makes the 5% where we differ very interesting.
Okay. So we can refine these 5%. Where does it come from? And this is something that I've been looking at. In fact, because of this debate, in fact, I dig in the question. Is that okay? Where do we find limitations?
Where do you draw that line?
It's actually in 1985, there was a convention of jurists it was in the United States. They produced, because of problems they had with the governments in the states very often breaking the very rights of the Bill of Rights, U.S. Bill of Rights, and so on. They said, okay, wait a minute. Yes, you can actually do, you can put exceptions, derogations, but there has to be limits on the fact that you are going against a particular right. You have and they actually produced fairly long piece of paper, and I noticed one of the articles was the article 36, and in fact, unfortunately, they repeated the same error than we had in the original UN chart, which is not defining properly freedom of religion. So we again are with the situation where they actually they said that freedom of thought, conscience, and religion shall never be overridden by any government. Well, of course, that's not true, because in freedom of religion, you have the freedom of practice, of proselytizing, and so on, which are rights that can be logically and honestly limited in certain situations. So we have this team of jurists. These are people who actually should know better and continue to create the confusion.
So, go ahead.
It's because okay, they say that it's so they're basically telling people, well, this is unworkable, but this is what we think. Well, I say no. What we have to do is define what is in freedom of religion, and we have to specifically separate freedom of consciousness from freedom of conscience from the freedom of religion, understood as freedom of practical, external execution type of behaviors. We are talking about the practical behavior of people, and they cannot do anything they want just because it's a religious, their religions told them to do so. And what we have here is the government of Quebec, and it's not the first one, of course, decided that there are things that are going too far, and they had to step in. And they did it with actually something which is important, is the minimum interference that you producing the result that you want. So they did not said, well, any teacher in public school in Quebec should not wear any religious symbol. They said during work, and so on. And even they went even farther, which was something that many people in Quebec say, well, that's going too far. And they said that people who actually were hired at the time they were wearing religious symbols actually can keep them. That's the grandfathering of the clothes of the religious sign prohibition in class. So they did it the minimum required. But you think, and this is quite obvious, that in fact these religious symbols first are not easy to distinguish from other symbols, and second, that they have no effect. And in both cases, I will tell you, no, this is not true. If you ask anyone what is a religious symbol, this is a matter of fact. In a court of law, you would say, well, this is a religious symbol, and it is a matter of fact. There is no big deal. You can discuss with the verb if you want, but it's not going to go very far. Because the bear is not exclusive to a particular religion in a case.
Yeah, I'd just like to give Leslie a chance to respond to that. What do you think about what Michel has said, Leslie?
There's a lot that he's just said.
Yes, he's covered a
few thoughts. So I'll start quickly with his last claim that it's very easy to determine what is and is not a religious symbol. I disagree. There are cases where it is simple, but if someone is wearing a scarf on their head, it can be very again, absent someone claiming that it's a religious symbol or not, it can be very challenging to know whether someone's wearing a scarf because their head is cold, because maybe they have chemo, they don't like their hair or their lack of it, or whether it's an expression of a particular faith. It can be very, very challenging to determine whether someone is wearing a religious symbol or not. But I want to come back to where you actually started here, Michel, because you mentioned section 1 of the charter, and I want to quote it because I think we're in complete agreement that as passionately as we both defend fundamental human rights, they are not absolute, and our charter reflects that. So, section 1 of the charter says that all charter rights, and I'll quote here, are subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So everything in the charter, every right in the charter can be infringed upon if it can be reasonably justified in a democratic society. So given that, I question Michel's claim that the Quebec government's position is minimal interference. And the reason for that is because the way Quebec has decided to defend Bill 21 is not by claiming that it is a reasonable limit in a free and democratic society. They have skipped over that, which is available to them, and instead went straight to invoking the notwithstanding clause, which means that about a third of the rights in the charter can be exempted. And so the cases that have been heard in the Quebec courts before it got to the Supreme Court have found, and I will be summarizing, so there's nuance that I'm not going to get into right now, but I have said, for the most part, whether or not Bill 21 would pass constitutional muster, whether or not the infringement of rights, and I think, as Michel acknowledged, this is an infringement on people's rights. Michel believes it is justifiable, but that infringement on expression, on religion, on conscience is there. But whether or not that infringement is justifiable, we, the courts, cannot say because of the invocation of the notwithstanding clause. So, is it minimum interference? Is it justifiable? Perhaps. It is morally, sorry, no, but it is suspect because of the invocation up front of the notwithstanding clause, saying we don't want to be challenged on these grounds.
Okay.
And so if Bill 21 was inherently reasonable, I think the Quebec government could have and should have defended it as such.
So just further on that, Leslie, what would be an example of where the state would have justifiable interference, where its interference is obvious but it's justifiable?
So I gave an example earlier. If someone is wearing a motorcycle, if someone is riding a motorcycle, or someone is visiting a construction site, the law says you need to wear a helmet or you need to wear a hard hat.
And that's interference that's justifiable.
So I think that is for people that wear particular types of footgear,
Yeah.
Because of their religious faith, they do not get an exemption from these health and safety requirements because of their faith. So it is an infringement on the expression of their faith.
Yeah.
But it is a justifiable one.
Yeah, I think this is the key element here, that you're talking about infringement with respect to expression, religious expression, or the communication of ideas. And it's not as simple as a safety matter. It's a question of expression, religious expression, and religious freedom. And so that's where the concept of justification becomes more difficult to parse.
So I'm not sure I understand the distinction that you're making here, Robert. If my faith says that I need to wear something on my head, and that's not compatible with a hard hat, for example, Um, you know, it I have to compromise my faith, my sincerely held belief, in order to work on a construction site or to even to visit one. And we have determined, and I think it's the right call, that um, that you can't say, you don't get an exemption, and we're not going, and this is also important. We're not going to strike down the law. The law exists. This particular law exists for a good reason. Like one possible result is that we as Canadians say, you know what, this hard hat law is just it's too strict, it's too unforgiving, it's not justified. We're striking the law down. In principle, we could do that.
Right.
We haven't done that because we've shown that it is in fact a good idea. It saves lives, it saves health, and we don't grant an exemption to religious folks that say that they need not to wear one.
Yeah.
So it is an infringement.
Yeah.
But you're trying to draw a distinction between conscience and expression. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand your question here.
I'm exploring this liminal zone between state intervention or intrusion, which is not justified, versus when it is justified. And you've both earlier in this conversation recognized that there is a line somewhere where, yes, the state can overstep in one way or the other. And in this zone between the two, what constitutes justification for the state's intervention or non-intervention?
Okay,
and what criteria do you use?
Okay, thank you. No, I think I get it now. And I've got a proposal, and I'm sure Michel will have a different perspective, which I look forward to hearing in a moment. And I think the key here is motivation or purpose. If the motivation is health and safety, and incidentally, it has an effect on a subset of the religious population, then this is a potentially justifiable infringement. If, however, the purpose or the intent is to target the religious population or religious, like that is what we are trying to do, then we have moved from a secular position. Health and safety has absolutely nothing to do with religion, even if it has an impact on the religion, a religious community. The purpose is completely secular. And if we move to where the purpose is to target or to impact a religious community, then we are violating both the principle of government neutrality in religion and the principle of separation of church and state.
Okay, so where would you draw that line, Michel, in terms of where the state is justified or not justified? What criteria do you use to determine when the state is or is not justified?
Well, you have to figure out who is the victim. In the case of the motorcycle helmet, the victim is quite diffuse because it's basically the insurance premium of everybody that is impacted. But in the case of the civil servant, the impact, depending, of course, it's depending if it's a judge. But in any case, remember that in Bill 21, we are talking only about people with the authority of the state. It's not something that is without potential victims. We are talking about people who are civil servants who are talking to the public, and they present the state as a neutral. They have to present the state as a neutral and presumably benevolent organization and institution. If they don't do that, what can happen? Well, don't forget, this is also a preventive action. It's not necessarily something that is visible every day. Most of the case, there is no big problem. And the question is, in the case of teachers, because usually this is the teacher which is a problem, and the judge as well. The judge, I gave you some example already, I think, on the fact that a judge with a religious symbol is immediately perceived as biased, whatever you do. And the case of the teachers, the question is, what is the influence of doing passive advertising, that's what it's called, during many years for children, they are receiving the image of a model. Don't forget, a teacher is a model, especially when they are younger. And this teacher is basically advertising 6 hours per day, 5 days a week, for months, and it's a very important figure in the mind of a child. The teacher is almost close to God. I mean, they are the second parents in a sense, and this is very important. Now, if this teacher is projecting an image which is in contradiction with the belief not only of the child but of the parents of the child, we have a victim here. I'm sorry, but this is important to realize that this use of passive advertising is not without consequences. Otherwise, the Advertising Agency of Canada would be basically ripping off their customers, because they have been spending, like when I write my first paper on that in 2019, they were spending $900 million on passive advertising. Why? You have to ask you, why is passive advertising so important for commercial corporations to spend that much money? Well, it's because it's creating a brand recognition first, and then a positive image, which will mean that later on, when the child is older, he will actually instinctively, he's not even thinking, and we are not talking about conversion. We are talking a positive attitude toward a particular religion. And that is actually influencing, proselytizing on children. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. And this is not allowed, because the neutrality of states requires that you do not unduly influence the mind of children, especially if it's in fact in contradiction with the parents' opinion.
Yes. So Michel, I hear you saying harm and victimization should be a key criteria. What do you think about that, Leslie? Who is the victim and how much is the harm?
So I want to know if there's any evidence for this claim. Like the scenario that Michel has just raised is not a good one, but Quebec has existed for over a century, for not quite 2 centuries in its current form. Public institutions have existed, public education has existed roughly for a century or so in its current form, or close to it. I would like to see some evidence that if someone has a Jewish or Hindu or Muslim or Catholic or Presbyterian teacher in their primary grades, that they are more likely to adopt that faith as an adult beyond the influence of their parents. Or I would like to know what the harm is beyond a hypothetical scenario, because I haven't seen it. And the second point that I want to make is that there are already laws and regulations that exist, which I fully support. I want to say what I'm about to say are things that I think are that I fully support, against active proselytization. There was a case in the classroom, among other places. There was a case in Quebec in just a few months ago, I believe, September or October. Sorry, I'm pulling this from memory, so if I get any of the specific details, but there were a dozen or so teachers at a particular school that all from the same country, and I believe Northern Africa, that were actively instilling their religious principles and enforcing them in the classroom. And this is entirely inappropriate. And this came to light. They are investigated. I believe these teachers have been suspended pending a further investigation. None of these teachers, to the best of my knowledge, were wearing religious symbols. And this is being dealt with completely outside of the scope of Bill 21. It's covered by other legislation. So I think that what those teachers were doing was wrong. I think this came to light, and that there are punitive actions being taken, and those are entirely appropriate. So I don't. I think Michel will acknowledge that there is a harm, that there is a violation of expression to adhere to to what Bill 21 says. And what I'm asking for is for a more evidence-based justification for that infringement than what sounds to me like a hypothetical scenario that I'm not sure actually comes to pass in reality. I've not seen any evidence for it. I haven't, and if it exists, I welcome more information. But as it stands, that's the best of my understanding.
Yeah, it's a valid question. I ask myself that as well before, but I got witnesses in religious communities. In fact, that's an interesting thing. It's the fact that we have experienced, not necessarily with the new communities now, but we do have the experience of the Catholic Church and in Quebec, and we know what it means. I have an ex-nun, Andrea Richard. She was first sister and then a Carmelite. She had two careers until she actually decided that was crazy. And how did she become a nun? Well, you ask. She proposed the explanation. She said, "Well, I was in a church in a school where the teachers were all wearing these nice garbs, and they looked powerful, and they were fairly benevolent also. And when the priest came to do some recruiting, she didn't think twice." And she had bought the brand. The Catholic brand was already imprinted in her mind. And she said, "Yes, I want to be a nun." And this is amazing. Of course, she was already but her parents were, although they were Catholics, they were completely against the idea that she becomes a nun. And this gave me an insight on the psychological influence that we don't necessarily measure with a very precise instrument, but it is there, and it is producing, in this particular case, it's produced a catastrophe.
Michel, I want to challenge you on two fronts here, based on what you just said, and I don't want to take away.
I have other examples, by the way.
Let me just say two things and then back to you. The first is, you said for this girl, all the teachers were wearing habits. I don't really want a school where all the teachers are wearing habits, but I have no objection if they have one teacher that's wearing a habit, one teacher that's wearing a hijab, one teacher that's wearing a kippah, another teacher that's wearing a turban, and probably a majority of teachers that are not wearing any kind of religious symbol. I don't think it's going to have the same effect as as you said, when all teachers are wearing the same type of symbol. And the second thing that you said is that when the priest came recruiting, well, that shouldn't happen. If that's happening today, That's entirely inappropriate. I'm not saying it didn't happen in the past. It did, and that would be so offensive to people today, I think, is a
Yes.
measure of the progress, is of the progress that we've made, and this is progress that you and I both support. So,
Yeah.
for those two reasons, I want to challenge you on that example. Back to you.
Okay, let's take a more modern example. The idea is that when you actually influence people in believing that a particular faith is benevolent and is something to be accepted, it becomes a norm. So you are making, for example, with the veil, the Muslim veil, which is one example, of course, you are making quite a direct communication. The submission to God is normal. You have to. It's my model, which happened to be this teacher, is submitting to God and accessorily also to men in her family, and this is a norm. So we normalize religious concept within public school. If you want to have such a teaching, well, there is in Quebec and in Ontario, there are religious schools. In Quebec, we have 15% of private schools. Many of them are religious in nature, and therefore you have a choice. If you want that, you can have it. But if you go to a public school, you should not have this problem of normalizing religious concept from the earlier age. This is not something acceptable because it leads later on in critical situation. The person who has been influenced this way will automatically give a positive, it's going to be deciding. Yes, if you have to decide if a particular person should be part of the ethical committee in a particular hospital, for example, and if you think, if take a Catholic person, for example, she would be considered as a person valid for ethical decision in a hospital. But you are not necessarily Catholic, but you think, well, you have seen Catholics before, the teacher was nice, therefore you accept. Essentially, you are facilitating entryism, which happen to be very, very real threat to humanism, by the way.
Okay, so I think we've reached a
It's
point
a threat.
of disagreement. I'll be fairly quick here. I question your contention, Michel, that if a student sees one or two teachers wearing a hijab, maybe a teacher at some point wearing a kippah and another wearing a turban, and a majority of their teachers are just wearing what you and I would consider normal garb, that this is going to have the effect of normalization. Also, if there's someone that wears, for example, a hijab, and let's say she's a wonderful person and a nice teacher, I have no objection to students saying, I had a Muslim teacher and she was wonderful. Like I don't see the harm in that. And I think it's a big leap from I had a Muslim teacher and she was wonderful to the principles of Islam are good and I should adopt them for myself. And I'm not seeing that leap. I want to make one more point and that is, in my view, secularism, political secularism, which is what we're talking about today, it is a compromise position. I stand against government coercing people to abandon their religion just as much as I stand against government enforcing religious dictates on the population. I don't think that, I certainly have my own opinions on the value of religion and of various faiths, but as a political secularist, I don't want the government to enforce or create policies based on my preferences. I don't want secularism to promote agnosticism or atheism or humanism. I don't want it to preference atheism or humanism over faith. I want government to be neutral in matters of religion, not take a stand. And I do believe that secularism, in this sense, is essential for a pluralistic democracy.
Wow, interesting thing to say. Michel, any instant reaction on that one? No?
Well, I would say I agree. The question is always in the practice. What do we do for that?
Yeah. Devil's in the details. So
always.
Yeah. So
we don't want the state to tell us what to believe in terms of religion. That's quite clear. But when we let people, and you have been talking about one or two religious people making in a larger staff in a school, that's unfortunately that's not always the reality. We have schools where you have a majority of Muslim teachers, for example, and we have seen what it gives in the Bedford school scandal. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that the bill, we are talking about Bill 21, but we have Bill 26, Bill 6 of Quebec, Bill 9 of
Bill
Quebec.
9, yes.
Which has been voted, in fact, unanimously. 92 votes for, 0 against, 0 non-counted. So this is in this bill, is extending Bill 21 requirements to kindergarten, to the preschoolers.
Yeah.
And why? Because I have seen that. I have seen preschools, what we call CPE, and in French, the Centre pour la Petite Enfance, entirely staffed with veiled women, including hijabs, like that. That's the reality on the ground right now.
Yeah.
So,
Michel, I'm sort of a little interested in what you said in terms of extension of this and how the Quebec government under Bill 9 is proceeding further on this. Because earlier on in our discussion, we talked about boundary conditions and limitations, and so the question becomes, in my mind, what kind of where is this going? How far can this go? So, if you had to state one clear boundary condition for this approach to laicite, one line that prevents overreach, what would it be? How would you apply it in borderline cases like it, as in teachers?
The question is to me?
Yeah.
Okay. The question is
the limits of laicite. I mean, how far would it go? Is there limits that constrain the laicite approach?
You cannot. If you are a civil servant, you cannot use your position to promote by any means, and that includes passive advertising, your religion upon the captive audience, especially people asking service from the government, and things like pupils in a classroom. This is basically abusing a situation where you have 25 people where you are trying to perhaps you are doing it unconsciously. It's possible. The question, the state is not concerned with what you think. It's concerned with the effect of what you do. And that's the effect of what you do is you are making religion something like not necessarily normal, but something which can be used by your teachers and still be considered a positive things. As I am, as an atheist, I don't think it's a positive thing. And I don't want my grandchildren to be influenced by this type of proselytizing. even if it is passive, even if, and in fact, you have to realize that that's the theory, but in practice, you have always a little girl who is going to ask the teacher, why do you have this rest, for example, while the other teachers don't have it? And then immediately the answer by the teacher will be proselytizing, whether you like it or not, because she's going to explain, well, that's her religion and blah blah blah, and this is and then the red line is crossed.
Do you think the red line is crossed by doing that, Leslie?
As we said before, the devil is in the details. But if this teacher says, as Michel just indicated, well, I am a Muslim and this represents my faith, and it represents that I am modest and I submit to the dictates of Allah. No, I don't think so. That's just a simple factual statement.
Yes.
The question was asked, why do you wear it? And this teacher has responded. But it could easily veer into things, and if it gets into, and that is why you might want to consider wearing it, or something like where Islam is the one true faith and all others are invalid. That would cross a line. So where we both agreed that, or all three of us agreed that the devil is in the details, it does matter. But if the teacher answered the question along the lines that Michel indicated, a factual response to why is she wearing the hijab, no, I do not think that crosses the line. I think that's simply true, because this same curious student could ask the next teacher, why aren't you wearing that? Or why are you wearing this other symbol? And get a similar or different answer. And I think even our kids can understand that different people do different things. That's not that's not a problem, and that's something that we've seen in all of our children.
Okay, I have another example. This is in fact, this is a real example, by the way. It's not hypothetical. We have, and this is this is the reason one teacher from Muslim background, but she is not wearing a religious symbol. Which we are talking about within the, because we are.
Well, I support the right of her not to wear one. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
We have this. Nadia El Mabrouk. She is the president of the Rassemblement pour la Laïcité. That gives you the idea that she is on our side of the spectrum. And she is, as she says, she has children. She has a daughter, and she was basically influenced by her teacher at school that was wearing a veil, and she understood from that her mother, who was a Muslim not wearing a veil, was actually a sinner. So she comes back to the house and, Mom, you are wrong. You should wear a veil. You see this type of situations caused by the teacher wearing a religious symbol, and this is a situation which has been repeated. We have a written testimony on these things.
So I mean, I'm not familiar with this case. I believe that it's happened. My question, but it strikes me as unlikely that it was simply seeing the teacher wearing a veil that would lead a child to believe her own mother is a sinner. There had to be.
Well, you have
there had to be someone, possibly the teacher, quite probably the teacher, but I don't know because I don't know the details. There had to be someone to make the connection. Says, I'm wearing a veil. Anyone who doesn't wear a veil is wrong and evil and a sinner. And if her teacher said any Muslim woman not wearing a hijab is a sinner, that crosses the line, and that's already covered. That type of proselytization is already covered outside of Bill 21. Like we don't need Bill 21 to cover that scenario.
The question is the dynamic of within a class is more complex than that. You have children and you have a teacher. Let's say the teacher has a veil, and in the class you have actually several little girls with either a hijab or a veil, and we have also other Muslim little girls without the veil, and then basically the teacher, by wearing a veil, is validating the girls wearing it. And we are talking about little girl, 7, 8 years.
And in the hallway and in the classroom just down the hall, where presumably there are other girls wearing veils and other girls not wearing veils, and they have a teacher that isn't wearing a veil, could a Muslim parent say, that teacher who isn't wearing a veil is setting a bad example
well, I don't care.
For my veiled children, and right, like basically use the same logic, but invert the premises.
Yeah, but the logic cannot be reverted because it means that you have to in fact ask a teacher to make a religious decision, in fact, and that's not acceptable. So
I agree.
So if we want the appearance of neutrality, well, you need it. You need to have a teacher without religious symbol.
All right. So this reminds me, like this argument that you're making reminds me of a quotation from Anatole France that says, "The law in its majestic equality forbids the rich as well as the poor from stealing bread and sleeping under bridges." Yeah, technically that law applies to everybody, but in fact it doesn't, and it's very targeted against people who are very poor, regardless of the validity of such laws. And so what you're saying here is that we have a law that is you're arguing that Bill 21 is neutral.
Yeah.
And I dispute that. I don't think it's. I think it's quite specifically targeted. So that I think we've arrived at a fundamental difference of opinion here.
Okay, we initially the Catholic priests and nuns in the Quebec schools when in 60 something like 64. 66, the schools, the confessional schools were in fact taken over by the government and became state schools in effect. They decide on their own to remove their gown. We didn't have to actually create a requirement, a law requiring that they have a neutral appearance. They did it on their own, which was, you have to realize the rapport parent. The rapport parent is the source of this whole story, in fact, in 62. And it gave, it said basically the government has to take over the schools and they have to become neutral schools. Not this was not done for a long time. It took another 40 years, 30 years to get the confessional school converted to linguistic school only. But the question is, at the time of the taking over by the states of the confessional school, essentially in Quebec, that was a Catholic school with some Protestant schools. all these clergy people who were teaching removed their garb and went to teach without it. They did it on their own, which is actually quite amazing. But you have to realize that the church itself in Quebec was evolving. We call the rapport parent by the name of the leader of the commission, which was Monseigneur Parent. That was actually done by someone who belonged to the clergy, which is quite unexpected, let's say. And so this transition was fairly quiet. That was, we call it, the Révolution tranquille, of course. And that was possible. But that was possible because the church accepted that it could take a second seat in teaching. They kept a certain number of schools, of course, but most of the schools became actually state schools.
Oh, we have. Go ahead.
That was the sorry. We were talking about the this secularization of the school was challenged basically with the arrival of the Muslim immigration. Yes, it's mostly Muslim, but it's not only Muslim. We have problems. We have problems with the Sikh. We have problems with the Jews as well. I mean, the Jews basically have their own system right now.
We're getting into a little bit of overtime at this point, but we have a question from the floor. Yeah. Pierre, you want us to ask your question directly, or I can just read it from the chat?
Hi, Robert. Thanks for a good discussion. I have a question for both. Do you agree that freedom should only be limited if there is demonstration that it causes harm? Do you agree with this principle of Stuart Mills? So is the old discussion about whether certain practices cause harm to others or not. And I have a question to Michel. You seem to be saying that civil servants, people working for the state, should always be representing state view. Does that apply to researchers, including in academic conferences? And to Leslie, do you think that teachers should be allowed to wear political symbols and messages in class, including extreme right symbols?
Ooh, wow.
Okay, I should take the first question. Okay, what was it?
Do you both agree that freedom should only be limited if there is a demonstration that it causes harm?
The demonstration, I think it's a very important thing that it can be demonstrated to some extent. There are very few cases where you actually have to act preventively. That is, the harm is not done yet, but you know that it's going to happen. And that's a position that we do use in certain situations. We don't wait for the catastrophe to happen. We take action. So it's not necessarily, but I don't think it applies to the current Bill 21 because we can demonstrate the harm.
So what do you think, Leslie? Is demonstration of harm an acceptable limitation for freedom?
Yes.
Yeah, you believe so?
Right, and or highly probable harm. Like we don't always have to wait until the harm is there. But yeah, I think our default position should be to allow things unless we have evidence or very good reason to expect harm. I think the Millian principle is a good one, Pierre. It's an excellent question, though.
Yeah.
I guess we agree actually on something.
Okay, that's good.
We agree. We actually do agree on a lot.
That
I think,
true.
Michel.
Yeah.
I have every reason to believe you are as committed a secular humanist as I am, and that we both share. I think we share principles. In fact, I think we disagree. We disagree on the implementation and application of them in a very small number of cases, which is the focus of today's conversation.
Yeah. And Pierre's other questions to Michel. Do you think researchers are working for the state should always represent government views in the public as a researcher behind the scenes, I guess, right?
I know there are people that are researchers working for the state and participating in conferences and
Yeah,
like I did that for the Bank of Canada.
yeah,
That was an issue, in fact. Can you be allowed to present results
yes,
that go against Bank of Canada policy?
yeah. Michel, do you have any comment on that? Oh, is he frozen?
Michel's image seems frozen.
Your question is too difficult.
Oh, too difficult. Broke the internet. Well, what about the question to Leslie then?
Yeah, it was about do you think teachers should be allowed to wear political symbols, slogans, and including extreme right symbols?
Right. Well, I'm just going to. I think your question is valid even without the qualification of extreme right. Should teachers be allowed to wear political symbols? And I'm inclined to say no. That's and I and now I. But it's a good question. And so then the next question is, of course, how do I square
Yes.
my instinct of saying no, wearing a something that shows an affiliation for a particular political party, um, uh, with wearing a particular religious garment. And I will need to think. I can give you an impression because I haven't thought about it like that, which makes it an excellent question. So uh, uh, I think if I had a day or so to think about it, I'd be able to come up with I've got an intuition that says no, there's something about them that's different. But um, I'll give two suggestions, and I'm not finding either of them fully convincing. So I need to think about this a little bit more, which makes this an excellent question, Pierre. So thank you. The first is um, uh, there are certain characteristics of life, of humanity that we want to protect from discrimination. Things like race or national origin, sexual orientation, and religion is among that list. And uh, belief in a political party is not it's not on that list, right? I mean, if you voted for a different party than I did, I don't want to see you prosecuted, nor should I think I should be because I voted differently than you did.
Yeah.
But it's not really in the same category of protected expression above and beyond the general principle. And the second the second aspect is that according to the Supreme Court of Canada, and this is something that I favor, religious belief is a very personal thing. It's not up to the courts. It's not up to the government to define what the tenets of Christianity are, and it's not up to even if I call myself a Catholic, in the eyes of the Canadian law, I might have certain beliefs that differ from formal Catholic doctrine, and that doesn't disqualify me in a legal sense from being a Catholic or any other faith, right? But you can insert any denomination in there. So because it is a religion, belief is a personal thing, and religious expression is an expression of just personal. I think it's a little bit different than adherence to a political party and an institution. But I'm not sure I find either of those responses convincing. So I need to think about that a bit more. And I'll have to, I don't know, somehow get back to you because I think there's something there, but I'm intuiting it and I don't have a way to clearly articulate it without some greater thought. So I can give you a much shorter answer by saying I don't know.
I don't know. Okay.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure, Pierre. Wait,
Robert,
yeah, go ahead.
just quickly, what it seems to makes it more complicated still is the fact that some political views come from religious positions. Like in churches at some point in Quebec, priests would prescribe that people should vote for a certain political party. So the two can get quite intermixed, right?
They can. So from so I'll take this from two perspectives. If churches get a great deal of funding, subsidies from the government, over $5.5 billion per year, and I can justify that with the cost of religion reports. Just look up cost of religion in Canada. I'm a co-author of these series of reports. I think these should be eliminated. That is, like I said, government should neither support nor suppress religious expression. $5.5 billion plus per year is definitely government support of religious institutions. That's $5.5 billion violations of secularism. I don't think they should be getting those funding. And then once you're not being funded by the government, if any public figure, including a religious public figure, wants to say you should vote for party A and not for party B, that's their right. And all of the congregants have the right to vote for that party or not, as they see fit as individuals. On the other side, when you take up like political figures being inspired by their beliefs, I have no objection to that. So to take Tommy Douglas, voted a few years ago as Canada's greatest, or the greatest Canadian, father of our Medicare system. He was a Methodist priest, and in several interviews he said that he was inspired by his faith to care for his fellow Canadians for Medicare. But when it came to the legislation, when it came to arguing and compromising and crafting it, it was done on secular principles. He was inspired by his faith to care for his fellow Canadians, but we do it on, this is how we pay for it. This is how we structure it. This is why we should do it. These are the cost benefit analyses. These are the reasons why we should do it. None of those, even at the time, were done because God commanded it, because the Bible says so, because this is how we can care for each other. We become a better, stronger nation. So I have no objection to anyone, including politicians, being inspired by their faith to support or be against a particular policy, as long as their rationale and their justification for it is based on secular principles that are accessible to everyone, whether they are members of that particular denomination or faith or not. Got far more comfortable. Also a very good question, but that's one I have thought about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pierre.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm still trying to get to reach out to Michel. I can't see where he has gone, but because we do have to sort of wrap up here. One of the things I'd ask you then, Leslie, is what do you think the takeaway should be for people in the audience here tonight, this afternoon? If they, on the concept of state neutrality, what do you think people should think?
First, I think the first thing, and thank you, Robert and NEP for organizing this. There has been a tremendous amount of demonization around this issue. Nothing has split the secular community in Canada more than the issue or the question of Bill 21. And organizations like the Centre for Inquiry Canada that think it's bad legislation, we are closet Islamists, or we are just being smeared as we're not real secularists, like we have this hidden agenda. And people that support Bill 21 are Islamophobic or are racist. Like there's a tremendous amount of really slanderous accusations being hurled quite a bit within our own community.
Right.
And I mean, there probably are people who don't like the Muslim faith and are motivated by that. And there probably are people that are going to use opposition to this bill to advance whatever their secret agenda is. But for the most part, the people in the secular community are operating in good faith and have principled support or principled objections to this legislation. So having the conversations, respectful, fact-based, rational, is really, really important. And though I do not agree with Michel on this particular issue, I respect him as an individual. I respect that he comes from a position of, and I hate to use this phrase, but comes from a position of good faith. And is engaging in this engaging in this conversation openly and honestly.
Right.
And I do have my opinion. I do think that this is veering from government neutrality into active religious suppression. But I've expressed certain reasons why. I also think just tactically it's wrong. Like if our end goal is to reduce the amount, to go from political secularism to societal secularism, and if our end goal is to have a more secular society in the sense that religious observance and religious participation and religious attendance in houses of worship is to continue its general trend to reduce, I think this bill is the wrong way to go about that. And we haven't really talked about the tactical aspects of things. And I have arguments for that. And I don't want to get into it too much in Michel's absence. But that's my opinion that I have reasons to hold.
Mm-hmm.
But conversations like these are really important. I am hoping that everyone here, whatever their opinion was coming into this conversation, has learned something. And that everyone here recognizes that you can have good people on both sides of this issue that disagree. That the folks who have a different opinion than you are not just simply wrong. Right? And they may be more complexly wrong, but they're not simply wrong, and they're not coming from a place of hate or bigotry or ignorance.
Yes.
And if you've learned something, then you have changed your opinion slightly on, which is beneficial, which is why I'm here and why I'm glad that we've had this event.
Yeah. The idea in terms of open dialogue and discussion in a rational context, in terms of reasoned argument and exploration of different ideas, can involve all kinds of different attitudes and opinions and values. It's one point to say, that person can be wrong and I'm okay with that. But the harder part is I can be wrong and I'm okay with that. That is to say,
hey,
I may be mistaken.
If I'm wrong, I want to know. I've got homework here. I need to think about Pierre's question more deeply, because it's a good and valid question, and it deserves a full response. And I haven't thought that particular aspect through, and I need to. So thank you. And like this format, I think is useful. The Center for Inquiry Canada has been challenged to a debate on Bill 21, and we declined. I'm not interested in a debate. I'm not interested in taking my position and just defending it to the hilt, no matter what, and then using various rhetorical tricks to try and convince my audience. My goal here today was not to necessarily, my goal here today was not to convince the folks listening and whoever's watching this afterwards that I'm right and that Michel is just misguided and wrong. My goal here today, and I think Michel too, and again, I hope I'm not wrong in speaking for him in his absence, but I think Michel's goal today too was to explain why I am opposed to this legislation in a way that people understand it. Just as Michel was here to explain why he thinks this is an excellent bill, it deserves to be defended and even possibly expanded. And that, I think, is valuable, not to convince, not to sway, but to increase understanding, to have the dialogue, and to probe each other's positions, which we have done. And I'm very pleased with how today went.
And the origins of this whole idea has to do with an introduction to secularism for those who are less aware of the nuance and where this has all come from, which is it can cause great confusion when a person hears somebody say, I oppose this on secular grounds, and the other person says, I support this on secular grounds, and there's an appearance of not only contradiction, just not coherent. If both can oppose and support on secular grounds, then there's something not working here, right? It's incoherent, it seems, anyway. So yeah, but in this discussion, I think we've had an interesting examination of that. Okay, so I think I guess I'm going to wrap up here because I don't think that Michel can, for some reason, can't come back. So I just want to do a wrap up, which is a thank you to our speakers, and thank you to everyone here to participating in this Two Solitudes of Secularism with seriousness and goodwill that this topic really does deserve. I think today's discussion has illustrated something central to the New Enlightenment Project, which whether we can disagree and sometimes sharply disagree, while still practicing the habits of Enlightenment values, civic culture, clarity of definitions, openness to evidence, respect for the person, and the commitment to reasoned dialogue over, just slogans and suspicion. So whether you find yourself leaning towards Leslie's view of secularism or Michel's view of secularism, the shared aim remains recognizably humanist, protecting freedom of conscience, equal civic standing, and social cohesion in a pluralistic society. So this is exactly the work that the NEP exists to support, creating space for thoughtful, high trust conversations where difficult questions can be explored with intellectual honesty and moral seriousness. So if today raises new questions for you in the audience, and I hope it did, I think I'd invite you to explore more NEP talks, essays, projects, and things on the NEP website at nep-humanism.ca. So thank you again for being part of this conversation and helping to keep Canada's public discourse worthy of the values we claim to share.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Any final comments there, Leslie? Just throw that in.
Thank you, Robert, and the New Enlightenment Project, and especially thank you to the 15 or so people that have been here watching and listening for the whole time, taking 2 hours out of a Sunday morning to engage and to learn. Thank you all.
Yes, and hope many more people will watch it on the replay. So yeah,
of course. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great Sunday afternoon.